Will Charlie McAvoy ever win the Norris Trophy? Maybe, but he needs to improve one key area of his game.
You're Locked On Bruins, your daily podcast on the Boston Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Bruins fans, and welcome back to the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. I'm your host, Ian McLaren, and this is a daily show where we discuss all things Spoked Beat. Today is Thursday, May 30th, and I want to thank you so much for making Locked On Bruins part of your daily routine. Free and available on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Create an account and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, but it's perfect for the upcoming NBA Finals. Today on the podcast, we're going to discuss Charlie McAvoy's season in review and assess what it might take for him to win a Norris Trophy. Before we get into that, a quick reminder, you can find the podcast on social media at Locked NHL Bruins. And you can find me, my dad jokes, hockey thoughts at Ian C. McLaren. I am a lifelong Bruins fan. Been covering this team for about 20 years for various outlets. Was a full-time hockey news editor for The Score and have been hosting this podcast for the past 5 years. So let us talk about Charlie McAvoy and whether or not he will ever win a Norris Trophy. For those of you who do not know, this year's finalists for the Norris Trophy are Quinn Hughes, Cale Makar, and Roman Josi. And those three guys just happen to be the highest scoring defensemen in the NHL this season. Quinn Hughes played 82 games. He had 92 points, 17 goals, 75 assists. Cale Makar had 21 goals and 69 assists for 90 total points. And Roman Josi, 82 games played, 23 goals, 62 assists for 85 points. They were followed by Evan Bouchard, Victor Hedman, Adam Fox, Noah Dobson, Josh Morrissey, Mike Matheson, and Rasmus Dahlin as the top 10 scoring defensemen in the NHL this season. You'll notice a name that was not there, and that is Charlie McAvoy, who you have to go all the way down to 25th to see our boy Charlie McAvoy. 74 games played, 12 goals, 35 assists for 47 total points. This was a bit of a down year offensively for our boy Charlie McAvoy. In fact, the past two seasons have trended downwards, although he only played in 67 games last season, 52 points. He had a career high 56 the year before that. This season, he did have a career high 12 goals on 133 shots, which is the second highest of his career. And that's an area that he may need to improve in order to be seen as a bona fide candidate for the Norris Trophy. We've seen in the past that the winner is not necessarily the highest scorer, although that has been kind of trending that way over the past several years. And again, when Zdeno Chara won the award back in 2009, he was not the highest scoring defenseman in the NHL. In fact, that season, 2008, 2009, he ranked, 13th, only with 50 points that season, trailing Mike Green of the Washington Capitals by 23 points. So you see that it's not always the top scorer, but it has trended that way over the past several seasons with Roman Josi, Adam Fox, Cale Makar, Erik Karlsson. Last year, he ran away with the scoring lead among defensemen. And That's just how it has been recently. But it's not always the case that the highest scoring defenseman will win the trophy. Erik Karlsson last year, 101 points. He had 25 more than Quinn Hughes, so that was kind of a no-brainer. The year before that, it was Roman Josi. He had 96 points in 2022. But it was Cale Makar, actually, who won the Norris Trophy that season. He had 86 points and a much better plus-minus. So it's not, again, always the top scorer that wins it. That leads into the debate as to whether it should be a Bobby Orr Trophy for the best offensive defenseman and then the Norris Trophy for the best defensive defenseman. It's really supposed to be the best all-around defenseman. You could argue that Erik Karlsson is not that, but at the same time, if you're scoring 25 points more than the next highest scoring defenseman, the whole point of hockey is to take the puck away from your own goalie and get it down the ice. So if you're scoring a lot, you're obviously achieving that level of success. For Charlie McAvoy, he plays very heavy minutes, and we'll talk about that in the season in review as to perhaps what went wrong in the playoffs. But in terms of time on ice, he ranked 7th among all NHL defensemen this season, 24 minutes, 51 seconds per game. That's just about a minute behind John Carlson, who had 25 minutes and 54 seconds of average ice time, 52 points for Carlson. Drew Doughty, Mike Matheson, Seth Jones, Rasmus Dahlin, Brock Faber, all ahead of McAvoy, who was ahead of Hedman, Makar, Letang, Hughes, Josi, who rounded out the top 10 in average ice time. So he's among the league leaders in average ice time. He plays on a team that is very good defensively. In fact, he's the best defenseman on a very good defensive team. A lot of that has to do with the fact that the last man standing, the goaltending has been so strong, and that's why the overall team defense goals allowed are low. But when it comes to offense, league leader, Cale Makar, 1.17 points per game. Charlie McAvoy was at 0.64 points per game, 22nd ranked at his position. And the one area that could really improve is shots on goal. Cale Makar, again, leading with, Quinn Hughes. Cale Makar leading in points per game, 1.17, 1.12. Makar with 21 goals. Quinn Hughes with 17 goals. McAvoy still had a pretty good season with 12 goals and a shooting percentage of 9, which is right up there with Cale Makar, who had a 9.1 shooting percentage, Quinn Hughes, who had an 8.5 shooting percentage. The difference is they had way more total shots. Charlie McAvoy this season ranked among defensemen 47th in total shots on goal. Roman Josi at 268, McAvoy at 133. That's almost double the amount of shots. And you can see that in terms of the results. Josi had 23 goals on 268 shots for a 8.6 shooting percentage. McAvoy with a 9 shooting percentage, 12 goals on 133 shots. So for him to be recognized as one of the better defensemen in the NHL, he needs to get his shot totals up. If he was able to get them closer to 200, which would put him in the top 10, he could easily have 17, pushing for 20 goals on the season. That's an area that he really needs to improve on when it comes to being considered one of the top goalies goalies, top defensemen in the NHL. And, it's not as if he's not getting opportunities. He has the 13th ranked offensive zone faceoff start at 5-on-5. That's one area that he kind of lacks behind his contemporaries. Makar, Yossi, Hughes, all ranked 1, 2, 3 in terms of offensive zone faceoff starts. Among defensemen with at least 1,300 minutes played this season. So he's getting fewer offensive zone starts, which means his team is relying on him more defensively. You would think that would be to his credit when it comes to Norris Trophy conversation, but it's keeping him from getting his point totals up, which is keeping him out of the Norris Trophy conversation. So all that to say, his defensive game is very strong, and he's relied on more heavily in terms of defensive zone starts than some of his contemporaries, some of his peers, but he's not getting the offensive numbers, and that needs to rise in order for McAvoy to be fair or not. That's what the Norris Trophy conversation is at this point in NHL history. We're going to talk more about Charlie McAvoy's season in review here and his outlook for the future as the podcast continues. The Boston Celtics are in the NBA Finals, and Game Time makes getting NBA Finals tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and a lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. The views from your seat is something that I love. You can get a panoramic view from your section and row, so you know exactly what to expect before you get to the Garden. Last-minute deals, you can save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, Celtics, even concerts, comedy, and theater near you. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Game Time, last-minute tickets at the lowest price, guaranteed. Let's talk a bit more about Charlie McAvoy's season. We've already discussed his perhaps lower than average shot totals, 47th ranked among NHL defensemen with 133 shots. That is something that, if you're averaging almost 25 minutes a game, that should probably rise a little bit. Now, again, he does only get, he was getting, in terms of zone starts, fewer offensive zone starts than his top competition in terms of the Norris Trophy. You have Cale Makar, Roman Josi, Devin Taves, Quinn Hughes leading in terms of 5-on-5 offensive zone starts. Charlie McAvoy, you have to go down the list a little bit to find him. He ranks 8th in that stat with an offensive zone start percentage of 58.89. So you look at, he's only an 8th, but you look at the difference between 1st and 8th, it's pretty significant. Makar, 70% offensive zone starts at 5-on-5. Josi, 66.67. Quinn Hughes, 61.68. And then McAvoy at 58.89. So he's getting more defensive zone starts than some of the top guys in the Norris Trophy conversation. Now, when it comes to defensive zone starts, McAvoy not as frequently deployed as Hampus Lindholm, who gets the majority of the defensive zone starts on the Bruins, as well as with, Brandon Carlo. But he's not getting the same offensive deployment, which would help you raise your shot total and also, get some more pucks on net, raise that goal total and point total. When it comes to the defensive zone starts for the Boston Bruins, let's just filter it here and look at who gets the most among Bruins defensemen with 1,000 minutes played this season. You have, in terms of defensive zone starts, Carlo, Lindholm, and then McAvoy. And then offensive zone starts, McAvoy, Lindholm, Carlo. But you have to put that in relation to the other top defenseman, and he's getting far fewer than those guys. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is that when we're looking at Charlie McAvoy in relation to the best defenseman in the NHL, he's getting fewer offensive opportunities with fewer offensive zone starts than his contemporaries, but he's also getting a high amount of, he has a lot more defensive responsibility than some of those guys as well. So you would think altogether that would put him in the conversation, but a lot of voters just look at those point totals and see what kind of numbers they're putting up. And I guess that's kind of fair, because you could argue the best defense is a great offense, and if you're scoring, putting up a lot of points, distributing, that means that you are keeping the puck out of your own zone and helping maintain possession in the offensive zone. But again, a lot of heavy lifting for Charlie McAvoy. He's asked to do a lot all over the ice, whereas some guys are more defensive-minded defensemen. Some guys are more prolific offensively. He can kind of do it all over the ice, and in that respect, he should be in the Norris Trophy conversation. Now, again, we'd like to see his shot total go up. If he was able to get 200 shots, that's like, or maybe even average 2 per game, per se, 164 shots, he could raise his goal total to 15, add, let's say, 45 assists. You're gold. You got 60 points there. You're more in the conversation. For him to make a jump up to 80, 92 points, I don't know if that's really possible because of the defensive responsibility that he has as well. And the fact that the Bruins, just don't demand that of him or expect that of him. They have it built in that it's an offense by committee more, and perhaps he's just not that guy offensively. Maybe we just have to admit that. Charlie McAvoy is not that guy, but that doesn't mean he shouldn't be in the conversation. Now, in the playoffs, he was often criticized for turnovers, for just poor play with and without the puck. And in fact, he had a streak of 4 games here to begin the Florida series where he did not even have one shot on goal. Whether or not he was playing injured or just not feeling it, he certainly wasn't at his best. And a lot of that was the fact that the ice was so tilted in the playoffs that it's like, just look at that analogy. Say the ice is tilted this way. You're at the bottom end of the ice. Everything is just coming at you, and you are trying to skate uphill to make things happen at the other end of the ice. You're going to get fatigued. You're going to make mistakes because all that pressure is on you in your own zone. And the Bruins were routinely caved. The possession stats were often in Toronto and Florida's favor. They were getting outshot. You had to be basically perfect because the scoring wasn't there for the Bruins. So those turnovers, etc., were amplified. He still played very well. He stepped up in game 5 with that goal and an assist, a 2-point effort, 6 shots on goal in game 5 against the Panthers. One of his best efforts in the postseason for sure. And there is still a lot to love about Charlie McAvoy's game, who, if you can believe it, is going to be turning 27 before the end of the year. It's hard to believe he is already that old. He's entering the prime of his career, or he's in the prime of his career, and he's locked down for several more seasons. We'll take a look at the future outlook for Charlie McAvoy here as the podcast continues. Now, in the playoffs, if you were on social media, you would have seen some people arguing that Charlie McAvoy is playing so bad that you have to look at potential trade options for him, which is just mind-bogglingly ridiculous. Charlie McAvoy is signed through 2029, 2030 at a cap hit of $9.5 million, which is tremendous value for him. You look at other guys around the league. Remember, he signed that deal when some other defensemen were in the midst of being signed to these contracts. And you look at Darnell Nurse, who has been very criticized in Edmonton during the playoffs. You have a guy like Seth Jones, who is kind of lost in the fray in Chicago. Zach Werenski, who's been injured. Right now, among the highest paid defensemen coming up this season, you still have Erik Karlsson at $11.5 million. I'd take McAvoy over him any day of the week. Rasmus Dahlin is being paid $11 million this season. There's a lot of potential there, but I'd probably still take McAvoy's 200-foot game. Drew Doughty played very well this season, but he's 34. I wouldn't be paying him $11 million. Zach Werenski, I mentioned $9.583 million. Seth Jones at 9.5. McAvoy, 9.5. Adam Fox, 9.5. And then Darnell Nurse at 9.25. Roman Josi, 9.059, and then Makar at $9 million, rounding out the top 10. Who would I take out of that group above Charlie McAvoy at this moment? Makar, Fox, maybe Roman Josi, but he's 8 years older than McAvoy. That's probably it. Who else are you taking over Charlie McAvoy? The Bruins are very fortunate to have Charlie McAvoy, and I was pretty open about when he was drafted that I would have preferred Jacob Chikrin, who is making less, like half, and who was drafted 2 selections after him. That was probably an OHL bias on my part. But among the defensemen drafted in 2016, Olli Juolevi in Vancouver, Mikhail Sergachev, and then Jake Bean and Charlie McAvoy. You could perhaps argue Sergachev over McAvoy, but I would take McAvoy any day of the week. You could argue at this point, let's look at the 2016 NHL draft. You could easily argue that McAvoy is a top 5 pick in that group, and maybe higher than that. Austin Matthews, Matthew Tkachuk, who was drafted 6th. The other top scorers, Alex DeBrincat, Clayton Keller, Patrick Laine, Jesper Bratt, Pierre-Luc Dubois, Adam Fox, Charlie McAvoy. I'd probably take McAvoy over most of those players, save for Matthews and Tkachuk. Would you take Clayton Keller? Perhaps. And Adam Fox. So easily fourth or at least fifth out of that draft class. Now, speaking of Chychrun, there are rumblings that the Ottawa Senators could be willing to part with him and a first-round pick for Linus Ullmark. If that's on the table, I would take that any day of the week. And we'll keep an eye on those rumors as the days and weeks approach. As for right now, Charlie McAvoy, among the best defensemen in the NHL, needs to get that shot total up, in my opinion, in order to rise in the Norris Trophy conversation, at least 60 points. But again, he is relied on more defensively than some of his peers. Not given the chances to start his shifts in the offensive zone like some of his peers. A more balanced game, which you would think would be a credit to him, but is actually seen as a disadvantage because people are just dazzled by points among defensemen. Anyways, that's today's episode, my friends. Thank you so much for taking some time to listen to these Charlie McAvoy ramblings. We'll be back tomorrow to look at the goaltending. On Monday, we'll look at the centers. Thanks for bearing with me as I was not able to jump on yesterday. Went to Stratford, Ontario to accompany my kids' grade 8 class on a field trip to see Romeo and Juliet, which was very entertaining. And maybe not the play as much, but their reactions to the play. And we're just trucking along here on Locked On Boston Bruins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your favorite team every single day. Take care of yourselves, friends. We'll talk to you again here tomorrow.